Alright. I have to talk about the facts here when no one else will, because we've got riots going on all over the world at the moment because of this George Floyd death or not, but for the purpose of this video I'll call it a death. I have theories, but anyway, we'll move on from that. If George Floyd is indeed dead, it is a horrible, tragic death from a corrupt cop. There's no doubting that, and if that is the case, the cop deserves to be charged, and at the very least, life in prison, and maybe something else as well. But, I mean, protests, I don't want to call them protests, riots have broken out all over the world, and now protests have started in Perth in Australia. They're about to start in my city of Melbourne on Saturday, I've been told. In the case of Australia, they'll probably change it from Black Lives Matter to Aboriginal Lives Matter, and some chant like that, I would suggest. But for one thing, all lives matter, and if we're going to talk about how much Aboriginal lives matter, and they do, let's talk about the hypocrisy on loop and what the left chooses to ignore. Now, in the case rates of domestic violence, Aboriginal women are 35 times higher, more likely to be hospitalised as a result of domestic violence. 35 times higher! And I checked the statistics on sexual assault rates to do with children. I had to look on Bing. I couldn't find them on Google, of course. But even I believe these rates are too low and they're not telling the truth. They're 4 times more higher likely to be sexually assaulted in Aboriginal communities than the white counterparts. Yet, what do you always hear? The image of the domestic violence is the white guy in the wife beater singlet, the Australian yobbo, drinking a beer and giving his wife a backhander. Does that happen? Yeah, of course it does. But does it happen in the rate they try to say that it happens, particularly in white communities? No, it doesn't. It's bullshit. And these lefties are going to talk about how much they love Aboriginals and Aboriginal rights and how they love Aboriginal children and all this sort of stuff, and how they want to protect Aboriginal communities. Well, if they want to protect them, why did they let the wives of these Aboriginal guys get beaten the shit out of all the time and constantly hospitalised due to domestic violence? And why do they continue to allow these children to get sexually assaulted in Aboriginal communities? It is an utter disgrace, and these children need to be protected, and so do these women. But if you bring it up, if you bring it up in any sort of meaningful discussion or debate, you get called a racist. When actual fact, they're the racists, because they're the ones refusing to discuss these appalling conditions in some of these Aboriginal communities, and Aboriginal children and Aboriginal women are being harmed as a result, for the left's refusal to realise the full truth. So they're the ones that are being racist by refusing to acknowledge the real truth, and they're harming these children. Some of these children need to be taken out of these communities, and they need to be taken out of them as soon as possible. But for fear of this is the cancer of political correctness. These children actually get harmed severely, and child services won't do anything for fear of being called, racist and things like that. But where if a white kid rings up child services and says, "Oh, my dad forced me to go to my room against my will," child services will be all over it like a rash. It's an absolute fucking joke. It's an absolute disgrace. So, left, if you really care about Aboriginal children, these Aboriginal women, demonstrate it and do something about these Aboriginal communities when we really bring up the truth of the rape, the sexual assault, and the mistreatment of these children and women. You fucking hypocrites. That is all.